Welcome to the K-State Regen Ag Pod, where we talk all things regenerative agriculture here at Kansas State University, across the state of Kansas, and beyond. I'm Nick Detter, your host, and today I'm joined by Scott Satterthwaite, Water Quality Coordinator for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment's Watershed Management Section. He joins me to discuss his work and how, even amid funding and staffing challenges for many public organizations working on regenerative agriculture, him and his team have found ways to successfully integrate the promotion of regenerative agriculture into the water quality improvement and restoration world. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, Nick, appreciate your asking me to give you a little information about our program here at KDHE.
To start off, Scott, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and share a little bit about your background and the role that you currently serve at KDHE.
Yes, I have been working for KDHE for 36 years in the same program. Uh, got my master's, my bachelor's degree from Emporia State. Found out really fast that through working with other agencies that if you were going to do anything with water, you really need to start looking at the land. And so that brought me up to the point of looking at non-point source pollution. And so non-point source pollution is anything that really doesn't require a federal discharge permit. It's based on runoff, precipitation, those kind of things. Started at KDHE as a groundwater monitoring network coordinator, and that took me around the state. So I got to see a lot of the state. I was going out doing public water supply monitoring, getting water wells, private water wells, samples, and so forth, taking them back to the lab. EPA Section 319 of the Clean Water Act works with non-point source pollution control. And so KDHE was going to get that fund started. I was hired on here to be the non-point source pollution control specialist. And all that meant was looking at ways to reduce water quality impacts, whether it was on agricultural land, whether it was urban areas or wherever. Fast forward, what we ended up doing was not looking at non-point sources as a whole, but starting to look at watersheds. In other words, drainage areas that had impaired waters. We did that uh, since 1990. Now, the grant has been every year, KDHE's received a grant, our watershed management section. The grant is a sub-grant program. So we give the grant funds out to organizations. Organizations are really the key to this. We have K-State University as a sponsoring organization. Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams are a sponsoring organization. We have a conservation, Miami County Conservation District that's a sponsoring org. The reason why I say that is because those sponsoring orgs develop a stakeholder leadership team, and that is a group of local people who want to improve water quality, but also know the landscape, know the people there, have the ability to build relationships, and all those kind of community things. What we come to find out was we had all these practices that were going to be structural, grassed waterways, terraces, grass buffers, and all those kind of things. When it came to actually looking at how we can reduce runoff and the associated pollutants, it really came to my mind after I'd gone to some soil health workshops, saw some really good speakers, and I said, if we can get the water to go down, 85% of our pollution problems will be reduced because sediment, nutrients, pesticides, 85% of that is runoff related into our waters. Now, regenerative ag is not necessarily a new thing. However, I learned that 5 or 6 years ago, we would not have known about the biological component. We would not have known about the symbiosis. We would not have known about a lot of those things until we got the kind of technology and sophisticated um, statistical analysis that we have now. What intrigued me about the regenerative ag was that they took into account what the offsite impacts would be on their fields. And if you look through the history of Soil Conservation Service and all those type of conservation agencies, those were really all about the producer. Those are really all about helping the producer. There really wasn't a whole lot of work on the offsite impacts. And now there is now. They've come around and there's a lot more work on that, but 15 whatever years ago, there was not. So what we've done now is we've used regenerative agriculture and the soil health principles to align themselves with water quality improvement. Now, that could mean everything from reducing runoff by increasing infiltration and aggregate stability through your improvement of of the biological system, but it also um, could be the reduction of your application of these different inputs, nitrogen, phosphorus, atrazine, all those kind of things. Now, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out if you don't apply it, I don't have to monitor it running off. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's really what we've tried to do is find organizations that can go out and look for producers who are interested in making changes. And making changes is necessary if we're going to get into the realm of trying to reduce our water quality impacts. The great thing about this is when we did that, we also found coaches and mentors that could go out and help producers because some of these people would go to a workshop, soil health workshop, and on a Friday be so excited. On a Monday, you call them back and they've rethought it or something. Well, coaches and mentors were available on the weekends. The conservation offices, the NRCSs weren't. So we really believe that this is a landscape type of issue. We have to do these things at a watershed scale in order for us to see any positive results at the monitoring point. So we have looked at these as small as a sub-watershed, so to speak, smaller drainages in a larger drainage. We have 14 of these watershed projects. They're called RAPS, Watershed Restoration Protection Strategy. Around the state, we have 14 of those with sponsoring organizations. And for the most part, there's one in the Canopolis watershed, but the rest of them mostly are in the central and eastern northeast part of Kansas. As a state agency, we're trying to work with the Water Office. We work with the Department of Ag, Division of Conservation, all those groups. We've worked with them, and we want to maintain, and NRCS, we want to maintain that relationship.
So it sounds like you're kind of a connector of a lot of different stakeholders in this space.
Yeah, we do. We try to find opportunities, and then we try to make connections between the two. I've been to workshops and found something I thought somebody else might be interested in. Instead of me trying to go between, I would just give the people that I was wanting these people to talk to, give them a little briefing on what their interest was and let them get together and they can figure out. And I'll tell you what, it works. We've
Hmm.
had some really good results come out of that.
So it kind of sounds like your guys' goal is to, like you said, either to improve that infiltration to get more of the water in the ground to prevent it from running off, or to reduce the inputs on the front end. So like you said, so then if you don't put it on, you don't have to worry about it as a pollutant source. So with these programs, how are you guys trying to achieve that end? Is it more through a cost share program? And I know you mentioned you have partners that you're working with, but is it focused on cost share or training or a little bit of both? Like how within these programs and with your partners are you trying to get farmers to the place where they can go from implementing these practices to do things that like improve infiltration or to reduce their reliance on some of these inputs?
All right. One thing we did was we started, along with the Department of Agriculture Division and Conservation, we helped fund the initiation of the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. And we did this because we knew we didn't have the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
We also knew that there were people out there that were much smarter about regenerative agriculture than we would ever be. And what that led to, though, was that led to the ability to have mentorship and coaching for these different um, areas. And so Kansas Soil Health Alliance did their best. They went and they became a 501c3 group. They can take our grants. They've taken other grants, done tremendous work. They have put much more emphasis on soil health, improving soil health, but also including the water quality and some of the other environmental benefits. So the best thing about this is that board is a farmer-led board. They can make farmer-led decisions. What we do is we use that information to provide to our sponsoring organizations, or we just link them up.
Hmm.
And I'm sure the Soil Health Alliance people will tell you they probably never imagined that they would be working with watershed restoration protection strategy people. But what they found is that there's such a need for this watershed community. And if we can get the community together through Regenerative Ag, we have a much better chance of showing results. And showing results will help get funding.
Hmm.
Uh, that's one of the keys here is EPA wants to know how much funds we're spending, but what our results are. What's the end result? Now, I will tell you that we really don't do a cost share. Our program and the sponsoring organizations, a lot of times they will do pay for a pound of reduction. So
Hmm.
we have a model that we can say, okay, if you put these practices in this particular area of the state, you can reduce this amount of phosphorus loading or phosphorus runoff. And so they will pay 30 pounds or $30 per pound of phosphorus, not an acreage, not by a cost share percentage. Because we believe that's really to us from the water quality world, that's really the economic driver is all the phosphorus that leaves your field does you no good and reduces your yield, but also increases the likelihood of having water quality impacts. That's kind of the way the program is organized. We've also had contracts with a consultant. We had a soil health coaching with Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams. Uh, we've been working with K-State on helping them kind of get through the big picture look of regenerative ag. And they have a soil microbiology lab now, and really things are really moving over there with Dr. Rice. I think
Yeah.
the biggest
Oh, go
thing,
ahead.
no, sorry, but the biggest thing though is EPA. We have convinced EPA that you don't have to have a waterway, grass terrace structure, a buffer to reduce your water quality impacts. And I will tell you this, um, if you're losing 7 tons per acre per year and it's going into a 60-foot wide buffer, it really won't take long for that buffer to start failing.
Mm.
That water's going to go down, that sediment's going to go on, it's going to start killing out the grass, and you're going to lose it. So the other thing we're doing is, to us, structures are a long-term maintenance cost. And we believe that if we can get more people to do this, getting the water in the ground and less runoff and having to either capture it, redirect it, or whatever, we use the soil as structure.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that that's an encouraging approach. That's, you mentioned Dr. Rice. He's someone I work very closely with, and you mentioned the Soil Health Alliance, another organization we work closely with at K-State as we try to promote regenerative agriculture. So all that stuff sounds like it's going in the right direction to me. I think my next question for you, Scott, is just, you mentioned you've been doing this since the 90s, like you have decades of work on this, and I guess I'd like to just hear your perspective on what have been some of the biggest successes in this effort in your guys' work? And also, what are some of the ongoing challenges?
Well, I think some of the successes has been we have been able to take impaired waters off of the impaired water list. So in other words, they're meeting their designated uses. Uh, and we also have really generated, I think, generated an awareness of the connection between land and water.
Mhm.
The Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams is a really good example of that. We have people who are avid hunters, fishermen, but we also have people who are interested in watershed management, soil health, wetlands, all those kind of things that make up a watershed. So if you're looking at those kind of successes, we have generated a lot of information. We've generated a very good website through K-State. It's called KS Wraps, and you can actually go there and find the 9-element watershed-based plan that these organizations are working with and contact them to see if they can help you out in your journey. We really do emphasize getting a soil health analysis done because we want you to know where you're starting in your journey. What you get from other type of soil analysis are not satisfactory for what we want to see as far as improving your infiltration, improving your agri stability, improving your nutrient cycling, and all those things. One of the biggest challenges we probably have is KDHE has two parts of it. One of them is the regulatory side, and one of them is the non-regulatory side. And 15 years ago, when I walked into a county conservation meeting and I said KDHE, red flags went up and
Mm.
walls went up. But as we started to go through this process and getting people out there in the field with our name, trying to show them we're trying to build relationships and get things done that way instead of through the regulatory process, I think we've really built a good reputation for trying to find solutions that help both the producer and the water quality agencies.
And just to be clear for our audience, so all this work you've talked about previously that you're doing would be on the non-regulatory side of KDHE, correct?
Correct. Yep. The regulatory side of KDHE is something that could be involved in what we do, but it's not our focus. Okay, so we've had we've helped people with registered livestock and um, helping them get an alternative water source, get them out of the creek or some of that nature. Um, so we try to look at all the different venues and opportunities out there that we can help through our sponsoring organizations. I would just say that we have we met with uh, commodity groups, farmers, state, federal agencies, and we revised the nutrient reduction plan. This surface water reduction plan, nutrient reduction plan is something that we have convinced EPA that we do not want to set certain nutrient standards. Um, and so we're using this nutrient reduction strategy to be an alternative. And regenerative ag, improved soil health principles, that's all in there. So if hopefully um, hopefully our commodity groups will keep going the way they're going. I know we've talked to Soybean Association, Corn Growers Association. A lot of them are starting to really start to ramp up their look at regenerative ag. Um, I would say, on the other hand, we have started getting more contacts from companies that in our sponsoring organizations are getting more contacts from companies that are interested in either field day sponsorship. It could be no-till drill company. It could be um, might be a fencing company. I mean, there's just all sorts of people who are going out and getting in the mix. Um, the governor's water plan has been very informative to the public, and now we're getting the public to go in and start talking to our sponsor organizations. They're getting much more aware about what's going on, what are the opportunities, not necessarily pointing fingers, but just saying we have to know who's doing what before we can even develop opportunities for those. And one thing we pride ourselves on is developing programs to meet different goals, but also be beneficial to others. And that's really the only way we can get things done is if we find benefits to others that also help us in our in meeting our goals. Um, the other thing I was going to mention was we see down the road that the nationally EPA is starting to look at regenerative ag much more strongly than they were. We have pretty much convinced them that this is a good way to try to improve water quality for the things that I mentioned earlier. But they've also been able to take this to other federal agencies and other organizations. So now we're seeing some of that move through to different opportunities. So National Fish and Wildlife Federation, all these different groups are starting to see that what happens in the water really depends on what happens on the land.
Mm.
And we believe we can, up in the smaller tributaries, we can reduce stream bank instability because we're not having those flash flows. It's coming in at a metered sense, just the way nature intended to. So that's probably the most exciting thing to me is I'm been able to work with everybody from producers to hydrologists to biologists to soil ecologists to a whole myriad of people that are very knowledgeable, and they're all looking at one thing, and that's make improvement in a watershed, whatever that uh, tends to be from the standpoint of the stakeholders.
Well, I think my next question is, and you kind of mentioned that KS Wraps website, but is there any other places that if a farmer was listening to this, where you'd want them to go and look if they were, interested in more of your work, or how to get kind of plugged in, or what first steps they should take on their regenerative ag journey?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is send them to Kansas Soil Health Alliance.
Mm.
Um, if they wanted more local, the conservation district, the county conservation districts, there's some around the state that are doing great things. In fact, the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts is one of our sponsors for our grants, and they are taking on the responsibility of some of the RAPs that were sponsored by county conservation districts, and they just didn't have the capacity. And then our funding got cut. So with that, we had to figure out another way. So we said, well, KACD is all over soil health. They're doing carbon credits. They're doing all these great things. So we have given them funds, and then they distribute those through the conservation districts that are in a 9 element plan, in a watershed based plan that we work with. And those watershed based plans are what we have to show EPA before we can get our, is one of the things we have to show EPA before we get our grants. We work hand in hand with EPA Region 7. In fact, some of those people were actually here before they moved there. And so there's a really good relationship between our section and EPA Region 7 Water Office. I would just say for the podcast viewers, if they really want to see things that we do, they could also, for regenerative ag, they could also go to our website, kdheks.gov. It's called the Watershed Management section. So if you just Google KDHE Watershed Management section, the reason why I say that is because um, that's where our program is, and there's a lot of other resources. But if you go down to the bottom, there's something I think you might even want to see, and it's a story map.
Mm.
We had EPA, some actual farmers, and ourselves went out and did a study up in Northeast Kansas, and we looked at what the implications were for improving your soil health in terms of groundwater protection. And you'll find that there was some pretty good evidence that shows that if you improve your nutrient cycling, you can reduce the amount of your nitrate leachability.
Mm.
And that's one of the biggest things. It's very difficult, very expensive to do groundwater testing with lysimeters and all these kind of things in the field. So the next step is to try to see not just whether or not it's in the water, let's see if it's even leachable. What we want to do is make 99.9% of that nutrient accessible to the plant.
Mm.
And then the other thing is the RAPS website. There's other things on there that's called the Kansas Healthy Watersheds. If anybody wants to see what a rainfall simulator on the table looks like, and they talk about flood to drought, it's through the Noble Foundation, and they have a really great video on there. There's also one from the Concerned Citizens Science, and it's called Soils to Sponge. It talks a little more about impacts on farms, but also on communities, and how improved soil health around the community can actually reduce the amount of impacts. Those are the two things that, besides the Kansas Soil Health webpage, those are the two things that we would probably offer from our office.
Yeah. Well, Scott, the last question I have for you, and this is the last question I ask all my guests, is I just kind of like to turn it over to the guest and ask, what's most exciting to you about your work right now? I mean, like I said, you've been in this space a long time, and so I think hearing from you about is catching your attention, what is motivating you. I think that would be valuable for a lot of people.
Once I saw the biology, the symbiosis. I mean, my master's and uh, bachelor's from Emporia State were on biology, and I went into natural resources management. Once I saw that, and everybody seeing that there was a relationship between the plant, the soil, the microbes, and everything in between, that's what really excited me from the standpoint. I mean, I have a producer who says he gets so excited when he sees a microscopic slide of a protozoa.
Mm.
And I've never heard of a farmer talk about a protozoa before, right? So it's a learning experience, and I love meeting new people and trying to see how we can help. What's really exciting to me is the people who have stepped up. We have huge corporations now. General Mills, we've actually had a contract with General Mills. We've worked with the environmental um, consortium. It's a huge ecosystem consortium. It's a huge conglomerate of partners. And the reason why I say that is because we have much more corporate funding going into these programs than we've ever had before,
Mm.
because they know this is the life and breath of their food chain. And if their food, if their life and breath of their food chain goes away, they go away. And a lot of them are starting to have sustainability mission statements, which they didn't have 10 years ago. We have a lot of people who are starting to look at this more on a human health scale. So we've got all sorts of different partners and opportunities to work with partners. And my whole intention is to see how we can even learn how to pay producers for their ability to infiltrate and have good aggregate stability. And real quick, I actually worked with the Army Corps of Engineers under the Kansas Hazard Mitigation Plan, and we did a model, ran a hydrologic model. We used actual infield data instead of out of a book. And we found that in Northeast Kansas and a watershed in Northeast Kansas, if we could improve the soil health, in other words, twice as good as what it was, infiltration of organic matter, if we could improve that over 50% of that watershed, we could reduce the peak flow at the bottom of that watershed by 8%. Well, with that said, doesn't sound like much, but if you think about it, that could reduce flooding, flash flooding. So hopefully one of these days we'll figure out how to do that. Now, in order to do that, we've got to get sampling and we've got to do data collection like they're doing with carbon credit. But that's that's my vision. If you start getting the water to go in the ground or your crops, letting it go through its geological cycle and into the base flow of the stream, you take a lot away from you take a lot of problems away from our watershed in our communities.
Yeah, Scott, I just completely agree that, and I think one of the powerful things about this regenerative ag concept, or even movement, if you want to call it that, is that there's a lot of different stakeholders that it seems to be able to meet their objectives. Whether you're a farmer and you're wanting to increase your profitability and your long-term resiliency of your operation, or if you're on the more of the environmental side and you're wanting to, worry about water quality, or like you mentioned with the corporate food partners, we've seen that same thing. We've had a lot of interest from corporate partners that are interested in this space, whether it's from their sustainability marketing perspective or for them to feel good about their supply chain. So I just glad that you took the time and kind of shared the perspective from somebody on the more environmental side, because I think a lot of our podcast guests have been more on the agronomic side or economic side, and I think it's encouraging to me is that like you mentioned, is I think maybe to some farmers there's this idea of like KDHE or EPA as the bad guy or whatever. But really, I think there's a lot of cool opportunities where we can be working on these projects and they meet both parties' objectives at the same time. So just really appreciate you taking the time and kind of laying that out from your perspective. And we hope to stay in touch and see how these projects develop.
I will say the very last thing is our EPA money is meant for innovation. We innovated things 15 years ago that nobody really wanted to look at. And now I've got people asking me, hey, do you have a report on that? So that's what we're doing. We're trying to be innovative and still meet those water quality goals and expectations.
That's very exciting.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate your efforts in your program.
Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in to the K-State Regen Ag Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.
After recording the episode, Scott reached back out and said he wanted to be sure to give credit to Don Sneathan for his work in getting the initial EPA Section 319 grant for KDHE, which was instrumental in getting this work off the ground. We thank Don and all the other KDHE employees and partners that have helped make this work possible over the years.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all